Hi, my dear. Before we begin, I need to ask you something very quietly. A question that scrapes the bottom of the soul. You've been hungry before, haven't you? Not for food, but for something more. For total connection. Have you ever felt the hunger? I don't mean the empty feeling in your stomach when you've missed lunch. I mean a cavity deep within the soul. That feeling where no matter who you embrace or how tightly you hold them, you still feel separated from the world by a thin, cold film. You crave to fuse with another person, to perhaps even disappear inside them. Tonight, we're going to step into the humid, restless night of Vietnam in 2025 to meet two souls who finally found that connection. One of them wanted to disappear forever, and the other wanted to consume someone completely. No screams, no struggle, no escape. This was not a one-sided hunt. It was a consensual, twisted, romantic dinner. The only unique detail is that a man sat at a table while another man became the meal. Now, if you're ready, close your eyes, adjust your breathing, follow my voice, and let us return to that humid, restless January. Let's draw the camera closer. Let's examine the two protagonists of this feast. First, there is Dat, 36 years old. Try to picture him. In the real life, Dat was unremarkable, quiet, silent, and easy to overlook. He is the kind of man your eyes would slide past on a crowded street. But inside his mind lived something else. A void and vast, dark, and endlessly consuming. In psychology, there is a word for this specific architecture of desire: vorophilia, a rare fixation rooted in hunger. Not hunger for food, but for absorption. For Dat, death was not an ending. It was a homecoming. He dreamed of being dismantled, dreamed of being cooked, dreamed of being swallowed by another, more powerful being. He longed to become food in someone else's mouth, to dissolve into another body, to truly merge with another life. Does this sound mad to you? To Dat, it was not madness. It was the ultimate desire to be needed. He wanted to become part of someone else's flesh, so he would never be alone again. So Dat sent a signal into the internet, like a lamb bleating in the night, not crying for help, but calling out for the wolf who could consume him. And somewhere, the wolf heard him. Sin, 57 years old, he appeared. In 2024, in that invisible digital world, these two lonely souls collided. To the outside world, Sin did not resemble a monster. On the contrary, he was a respected civil servant, a father, a good neighbor. He worked for the Market Surveillance Authority, serving as a senior official. But deep inside, he was a priest, searching for a willing sacrifice. When these two souls met in that encrypted chat room, Sat answered Dad's craving. "Are you afraid of pain?" he asked, trembling with anticipation. "No," Dad answered without hesitation. "I am afraid you won't eat me clean." Over years of conversation, trust took root slowly, deliberately. They drafted an holy agreement between them. A contract not written in law, but in longing. A contract of desire. And finally, Dat bought a plane ticket to the city where his killer lived. It was a one-way ticket. He knew that, and he hoped for it. Time turned the page to January 2025. For the rest of the world, it was just another new year. But for Sin and Dad, this date marked the end of a long, quiet countdown. It had been 4 years since they first found each other in the digital void. 4 years of messages. 4 years of planning. 4 years of waiting for the screen to become reality. In southern Vietnam, winter was just a word. There was no cold here. The air was dry, warm, indifferent. The sun rose on schedule, and the streets churned with that specific, manic energy that only came once a year. It was the Tet Rush. The city was drowning in color. Motorbikes wove through traffic, carrying pots of yellow apricot blossoms and tall kumquat trees. Markets spilled onto the pavement. Incense, dried candied fruits, and exhaustion hanging in the air. People were rushing, haggling for the best prices, hunting for red envelopes, desperate to finish the year's work before the clock ran out. To the casual observer, the world appeared peaceful and orderly, almost gentle. But inside an abandoned building, a hollow shell emptied for relocation, the festive world did not exist. A spacious kitchen lay waiting. A heavy green door guarded the entrance. Here, dust danced slowly in shafts of afternoon light. The afternoon sun filtered through grimy glass, settling across the floor. It was the same sun that shone on the flowers outside, but in here, the light felt strangely indifferent. It was quiet here, quiet enough to hear the heartbeats. Sin and Dad had chosen this private stage to complete their long-awaited pas de deux. The air grew dense. 2 breaths, 2 pulses, 2 hearts. There was no panic, no struggle, no attempt to flee. Everything was calm, restrained, and even perfectly ordered. The final stage was set within the building's washroom, a tiled, echoing chamber hidden away from the sun. Dad handed himself over completely. He felt no fear. Lying back against the cold floor, he began to pleasure himself, a final, solitary rhythm. He entered a state of absolute serenity, a trance where pleasure and death became one. Outside, the sun continued to shine. Time moved forward. Nothing was out of place. But here, in this tiny, tiled room, everything had tightened into a single point. And just as Dad reached the peak of his release, Sin brought the cleaver down. There was no hesitation, no chaos. Dad's life ended in an instant. On this warm, dry, sunlit land of the South, Sin became not only the one who ended a life, but the one who fulfilled a deep, dark need. He gave Dad what he had chased his whole life: total, absolute possession. However, for Sin, this was not the conclusion. This was the only moment when the crescendo of their ritual truly began. After the feast ended, the world did not immediately notice. Silence, after all, is easy to overlook. In the months that followed, carefully edited videos began to surface in the digital void. Sin did not see himself as a killer. He believed he was an artist, and the small white-tiled washroom that was his studio. He handled the materials with precision, almost reverence, like a master chef working with top-grade Wagyu beef. He did not rush. He set up a tripod. He adjusted the lighting. Every step of the process was documented with obsessive clarity. The camera captured everything in high definition. The separation of the joints, the peeling of the skin, the meticulous deconstruction of a human body. He cooked it, he plated it, and in the middle of this macabre ritual, he paused. He didn't look away. Instead, he leaned closer to the remains, raised his camera, and framed one final composition: the killer and his creation. He took a selfie with the meat. At first, no one took it seriously. The footage was too real, too precise, too absurd to be true. The footage was filmed like a high-budget, first-person film. Viewers assumed it was a hoax, a deep fake, just another AI-generated prank drifting through the feed. Even the police watched, and still, they failed to see him. The butcher standing quietly behind the lens. 1 month later, the material returned. Not as fragment, but as a collection. 11 videos, 98 images, curated, packaged, sold. It circulated in silence through the dark web, then into select Telegram groups drawn to the grotesque. There were no headlines, no public alarm. The footage spread unnoticed long before anyone realized they had been watching a real crime. But details speak, and the internet never sleeps. As the footage leaked beyond its sealed circles, it moved fast. It surfaced on social media. It trended on forums. Its reach widened, spreading like a virus. And with the attention came scrutiny. Online observers, cyber detectives sitting in glowing bedrooms, began to slow the footage down frame by frame. They hunted for familiar objects, anything that could anchor this scene to a real place. They studied the walls, white ceramic tiles, standard issue. Not the kind found in a modern apartment, but common in government buildings built decades ago. And then they noticed dust layered deep in the corner's dirt that shouldn't exist in an occupied house. They saw the lighting, natural sunlight, dim and hazy, filtering through glass that hadn't been cleaned in years. The room wasn't just quiet, it was abandoned. It was an empty government office, and Sin, the vice captain, was one of the few people with the key. At first, nothing yielded a name. No victim, no killer, until the details emerged. Detectives searched the background for meaning, and they found it in the corner of the frame, a green potted plant. To most people, it meant nothing. It was just office decor. But the internet noticed something odd. The leaves were too perfect, too stiff. It was artificial. They scoured the web for a match. They scrolled through thousands of images until finally they found it. An old photo on Facebook. A picture of a smiling civil servant, Sin, receiving a commendation. And behind him, on a filing cabinet at the same green plant, with the same bent leaf and same chipped ceramic pot, the background of a celebration had become the background of a slaughter. Then came the final mistake. They saw it. The butcher in the black mask had made a mistake. On his left arm, a flash of blue ink that the fabric could not fully hide. A number 13-9. The mask concealed his face, but the ink revealed who he was. The clues formed a trail, and the trail led to a door. These details were no longer just scattered fragments. The internet detectives stitched the pieces together into a complete profile. They connected the dots, building a data set and cross-referencing it with the real world. They compared the interior scenes, the sterile white tiles, the window frames, room proportions, matched against architectural records and city maps. Police took these public findings and sharpened them. They combined the crowdsourced evidence with digital tracking and a positive match on the tattoo. The net was tightening. Months later, in late November, the Vietnamese police successfully locked onto their target. Sin A, civil servant, a refined vice captain. When they knocked on his door, there was no standoff. He was polite, gentle, and did not resist. Confronted with the accusations, he showed no panic, only a disturbing calm. Finally, the police and Sin returned to where it all began, the abandoned office building. They moved past the kitchen, past the blue door, down to the underground septic tank. And there in the dark, they found what remained of Dad, just the bones. The feast was finally laid out in the sun, and the curtain at last was brought to a close. Finally, the police and Sin returned to where it all began, the abandoned office building. Even in handcuffs, Sin showed the same unnerving calm. He did not look like a man facing judgment. He moved like a tour guide, politely escorting guests through a landmark. He led officers through the dust-choked corridors, past the corner with the green-potted plant, the silent plastic witness that had betrayed him. And then he guarded them to the rear of the compound, to the mouth of the underground septic tank. There, in the filth, they found what remained: Dad's skull, bone fragments too hard to destroy, and shreds of the clothes he had worn on his final day. The feast was finally exposed to the harsh light of the sun, and the story came to its end. In 2026, the case of the Vietnam butcher entered the courtroom. Sin stood before the judge, clinging to his twisted logic. He claimed it was consensual, a service. But the law does not honor blood pacts. It does not recognize a contract for murder. The court looked at the evidence. They saw the extreme cruelty, the dismemberment, the cannibalism. They saw the viral videos, images that had horrified a nation. The verdict was inevitable. For his art, Sin paid the ultimate price. The court sentenced him to death.